On April 20th, 1999, in a high school in Columbine, Colorado, we experienced one of the worst days in recent American history. With so many lives affected by such an incomprehensible evil, you don't need me to remind you of the tragedy. But just 7 months before that terrible event transpired, we actually saw it on Hey Arnold. With all the reminiscing and nostalgia around the show, people often bring up the peculiar realness written throughout Hey Arnold, mostly from episodes like the Christmas special with Mr. Hyunh's daughter and conspiracy theories hovering around Pigeon Man, but one episode in particular isn't brought up in conversations around how far the show pushes the limits. And without further ado, let's talk about the darkest episode of Hey Arnold and maybe all of 90 cartoons ever. Season 3, Episode 6, Curly Snaps. The episode starts with the kids of PS 118 finishing up some games at recess, and Arnold's apparently fulfilling his duties in his last day as the ball monitor. As the bell rings, Curly approaches Arnold and asks him a series of questions about, ball monitoring. He asks him if he enjoys it, but quickly jumps into a line of foreshadowing questioning. It's pretty clear from the first 2 minutes of the episode what's actually going on in Curly's mind, and that he can't wait for his turn to have this petty position of power for all of the wrong reasons. Curly's a character we've seen many times throughout Hey Arnold with sociopathic tendencies, and whether he's framing innocent students for pulling the fire alarm or releasing zoo animals just to cause some chaos around town, it's very clear that at the very least, he's unpredictable. The following scene, Curly's lying in bed, wide awake, as he apparently didn't get a wink of sleep last night. His alarm goes off, he jumps out of bed and goes to the calendar. Today marks the day he himself obtains the power to monitor others' balls. As he combs his hair, he monologues internally about how personable and righteous he'll be, a real bon vivant. Today is the day Mr. Simmons will stand in front of his sack and say,
"This week's ball monitor is Sid."
And with a gasp of shock and disappointment, he begins to protest. It was supposed to be him. Mr. Simmons lets him know his decision is final, but not to worry because his time will come. And then we see it. As Helga would say, the twisted little freak has finally done it. Reality seems to warp around him. He's numb to everything, and one can only imagine he's trapped inside his mind with nothing but his own self-inflicted chaos. After lunch, not touching a single calorie on his plate, he opens the gym equipment closet and steals all of the balls which should be empowered to him. Principal Wart sees him but innocently assumes that Curly is this week's ball monitor. If only, Mr. Wart. If only. Curly sees the principal left his office open and begins to ponder. Once again, the doors are open both metaphorically and literally to him getting what he wants the most. Now, this is where the episode gets dark. And before I even begin with the breakdown, I want to make one thing clear. I am not perpetuating anything negative towards the creators of this show or the writers of this episode. I admire Craig Bartlett. I appreciate that a show like this at a time like this was able to get away with edgy satire. Unfortunately, nowadays, the freedom of artistic expression has dwindled. I just want to articulate one more reason why this era of animation was special to me. And due to the seriousness of this video, it will be a miracle if this YouTube's algorithms will even find you. So if you've made it this far, please consider subscribing to this tiny channel and leave a comment below. I'm only 250-ish subs away from monetization, and every single interaction with you guys goes a long way. But back to the darkness. From here, the word spreads around the school. Curly snapped.
He said it! He said it!
And he's locked himself in the office with around 500 rounds of kickballs. The crowd gathers, and outside the locked doors, Principal Wart threatens him to open up with the count of 3. 1, 2, After the third, the window above the door opens and Curly reveals himself, now in full Rambo attire, complete with a black tank top and headband. He means business, and without warning, he throws one of the kickballs directly at not Principal Warts, but actually hitting bystander Stinky instead, just straight up domes him. This is a surprisingly important detail, and we're going to be coming back to it later, so remember this. Get back, I say, he yells to the crowd as he continues to bombard them with kickballs. It doesn't take very long to notice the parallels of this episode, and the more you notice it, the more you can't really unsee it. Though the main characters are remaining calm, the rest of the students scatter and panic as they're pelted from behind. Word continues to spread throughout the school, and now crowds have gathered again, this time shielding themselves behind locker doors and textbooks and even garbage can lids. It's very obvious that it's imagery of things we've seen before, like riot shields and armored reinforcement. Now defending himself, Warts tries again to make progress communicating with Curly, but he lacks the very thing Curly's been craving this entire episode: respect. Warts doesn't even know his name, and the show hilariously reminds us, heck, none of the classmates do. We've known him as and referred to him as Curly, but his real name is actually Thaddeus.
Oh, thank you. Curly!
Thaddeus. My name is Thaddeus. Thaddeus Curly Gammelthorpe to you, Warts.
Finally, Warts is listening to him and cuts to the chase. What is the problem here? With Curly, Thaddeus, it's not that he didn't get his way, it's always the bigger picture. His perception is he was struck down by the man. It was an act of ultimate injustice. Mr. Simmons, who is technically responsible for this in the first place, overhears the comments and finally springs into action. Alas, we now begin a freaking negotiation scene. Mr. Simmons opened up his good cops routine with his classic sensitivity training, telling Curly that he's special and that they all respect him, but it's a tad too late for that. Shots fired at Mr. Simmons, followed by Warts telling him like it is. Simmons persists that at a time like this, he needs sensitivity now more than ever. Maybe he's right. But instead of accepting that he heard what he needed to hear, Curly rejects it with his superiority complex, and he once again violently and carelessly disperses the crowd with another round of kickballs. I'm too smart for your executive games. It is here, by diagnosis, that Curly is a psychopath. It's common to associate any sort of violence to a person being a psychopath, but in psychiatry, the diagnosis of psychopath is actually a very specific mental condition that has to meet a list of predetermined behaviors. One of the psychologists consulted by the FBI about the Columbine events, named Dr. Robert Hare, wrote in his book, Without Conscience, psychopaths are not disoriented or out of touch with reality, nor do they experience the delusions, hallucinations, or intense subjective distress that characterize other mental disorders. Unlike psychotic individuals, psychopaths are rational and are aware of what they are doing and why. Their behavior is the result of choice, freely exercised. Curly isn't lashing out because he wants to hurt Principal Warts, and he doesn't actually want to hurt Stinky either. All of his actions and decisions from the garrison office are means to a grander end for him. Basically, in his eyes, if the world doesn't respect you, then he's going to do whatever it takes, and he will do anything he finds necessary to demand that respect, as a psychopath would. And equally historically bone-chilling, Stinky and the others, anybody who could potentially get in the way of his selfish endeavors, would be what Timothy McVeigh described as not consequential, but simply collateral damage. They would be an insignificant obstruction and inferior to his ultimate desire. I've seen some speculation in forums before that Curly was either a legitimate psychopath or sociopath, but I believe this episode confirms that hypothesis entirely. What we are seeing him do and say and how he feels is textbook psychopathic. He knows what he's doing, and he clearly knows what he wants. It's not revenge, it's a statement. The episode continues with Mr. Simmons trying the sensitivity approach and encourages Curly to explain all of the injustices that added up to this breaking moment. After a third barrage of kickballs, Principal Warts finally makes some progress and convinces Curly to state his demands. 2 Yahoo sodas and a meatball sub delivered by, you guessed it, the short man himself, Arnold. 10 minutes into this episode, you don't need my frame by frame anymore, but the episode consistently remains dark. Arnold shows up with the demands and Wart's hints that we're dealing with a dangerous situation. The word dangerous seems to linger in his voice. Curly questions Arnold's intentions and decides to let him in, just when Stinky then reminds us, the audience, that yup, it's exactly what it looks like.
Spoilerkers! Now we've got ourselves a hostage situation.
Now it's a hostage situation. For those of you who remember this episode, probably also remember how it ends. Mr. Simmons realizes he made a mistake the entire time, and they come to a quick and peaceful negotiation. They shake hands, everything's okay. Helga asks them whether there was bloodshed inside, and if none of that was enough to crown this episode the darkest episode ever. Hostages negotiating with literal psychopath, the school kickballing. We concluded with the heaviest line in the entire series. When Mr. Simmons asks the students, "Now class, what did we learn today?" Helga responds with a line that will stay with me forever.
Yep, don't ever trust the quiet ones. They'll go bonkers and hole up in the principal's office.
If you liked this video, or at the very least was entertained, I have a lot of other Hey Arnold content on this channel and many more video essays to come. Maybe watch something a little more lighthearted next, like what I learned from Harold Berman, or my essay on escapism using a Goofy movie. Both of those are on the screen right now, and as always, thanks for watching.